Decentralization of IT is what caused a lot of the technology sort of strain and pain that we're experiencing. It's very unclear who the owner of AI governance should be. And if brands aren't honoring their privacy, consumers at this point in 2025 have choice.
Hello everyone, I am Sergio Maldonado and this is Masters of Privacy, a set of interviews covering the intersection of marketing, data, privacy and technology with a clear goal in mind, which is redefining the relationship between people, brands and media around transparency and control. Which is to say, we're aiming for real customer centricity, or if you will, human centricity. We regularly talk to DPOs, CMOs, CDOs, and whoever else we find interesting and able to share valuable insights. So we hope you like it. Please do reach out if you have any ideas on future topics or speakers. Okay, today we have the second episode in our Privacy Tech series, which we started a few weeks ago. We are now with DataGrail's CEO and co-founder, Daniel Barber. Prior to DataGrail, Daniel led revenue teams at DocuSign, Datanyze, ToutApp, and Responsys, and the last three companies were eventually acquired by ZoomInfo, Marketo, and Oracle, respectively. He also advises several high-growth startups. With Daniel, we'll start by discussing DataGrail's recent study confirming that 75% of all websites, having audited a total of 5,000, do not honor opt-out or do not sell requests. We'll use that as a segue to explore the gap between CMPs, or consent management platforms, and auditing systems built for an opt-in world, like that of the EU e-privacy framework, and those created for an opt-out world, like California's privacy framework, which is now the cause of so many headaches and fines, and a rethink of code-level or website-level strategies for cross-border compliance. I'll also ask Daniel about the ability of privacy professionals to take on AI governance challenges and the parallel scenario of privacy program management platforms stretching or overstretching to properly encompass AI compliance processes. And we do this against the backdrop of shadow AI tools spreading fast, just like shadow IT, or tools that are not vetted by the CTO or CIO, right? That's why shadow, have resulted in many of the privacy compliance or third-party risk challenges we now face. Let's go for it. Daniel, thanks for joining me.
You bet.
All right. So you ran this study, 5,000 websites, and around 75% of them you found do not comply with the global privacy control, the opt-out signal. What's your conclusion? Are you positive about this thing, or what's your take?
Yeah, great question, and excited to chat with you, Sergio. So I think when we did the research last year, we looked at 5,000 global websites, and what we found was, 75% just don't honor the opt-out request, which this is, I think, comes as a surprise to most privacy professionals. It's obviously not by design, right? When you set up your website, when you set up your consent solution, you ideally want to make sure it works and certainly provides the user the ability to opt out. But it's a challenging market on a couple of levels, and I think that's why we see this number so high. One, because marketing websites and just websites in general are changing rapidly, right? So teams will deploy trackers, cookies. Some will make it through the privacy review process. Some will make it through the security process, but Since the evolution of SaaS and now sort of product-led growth and teams being able to deploy software very, very easily and quickly, that's wonderful for marketers. However, it does create challenges when it comes to ensuring opt-outs are honored. And so, as websites change, unfortunately, the technologies that are managing that consent process often just don't keep up. So that's sort of one area that I see, causing this challenge. The other one is the regulatory environment, right? We have, 19 different states in the US with privacy regulations in place that are in effect and in enforcement. And, that's also pretty challenging for privacy teams to keep track of. And so just like a difficult regulatory environment to deal with. And then I think thirdly, you've got a set of technologies that were built to manage consent, most of them pre-GDPR, right? So consent really started with e-privacy and the need to, have explicit opt-in consent. And so that was what most of these technologies were built to support, which makes sense and is still a requirement today. But the standard in the US is different, right? We have a default opt-in structure where users need to be able to opt out to the sale and share of their personal information. And that's just very difficult because the existing solutions that were built just weren't built for the age in which we're in today. And so I think those three combined factors make it very difficult for privacy teams to, one, keep up, and two, to work with their partners in marketing to ensure that the website actually respects your rights and mine.
Yes. So everything built for an opt-in. How do you do with an opt-out? And
That's
so
right.
if you map it to the law, I understand Colorado now is pretty much aligned with or it accepts the global privacy control signal, that standard, as a valid one. Does California accept it as well? And who else accepts this thing?
Yeah, so there are a handful of states that now accept GPC. I'd say it's not necessarily required in a large number of states, except the standard is becoming kind of the existing requirement for folks to adhere to. But at the very least, right, even if folks are not honoring the GPC, ensuring that opt-outs are possible. So when visiting a website, ensuring that when someone opts out to the sale or share of their information, all trackers stop. That needs to happen, and that's where we see, litigation, frankly, at the individual level. So there are a large number of litigation cases, some of them related to, existing legislation going back into the 60s. Now we're seeing plaintiff lawyers submitting these cases to companies, and that's probably every second call I get on at this point. Lawyers have received one or many of those cases, and it's painful, right? It's not a regulatory enforcement; it's litigation by individuals working with plaintiff counsel. So it's a difficult thing, and I'd say, businesses need to find something that they can use that works, because users at this point are expecting that as they navigate the web.
Yeah, good points. Yeah, we've had some interviews on that, on enforcement and private right of action and this creative approach, from the plaintiff's bar. So something that is very tricky is that the global privacy control is not supported by every browser yet. So if you are, and I totally see that challenge, if you are a website owner and they tell you you need to respect this, it's not that it's that hard. But if most users, you look at your analytics and most people are using Chrome, and you see that Chrome is not yet abiding by it. Last time I checked, they weren't. I think it was just Firefox. I don't know, I will need to check again, right? You need to check these things every 3 months or something.
Yeah, sure.
But if that's the case, then people would sort of prioritize abiding by other types of opt-outs. So I can see there's this map of potential opt-outs. You've got the website opt-outs, which I understand you enable through your technologies.
Yeah.
So not just the signal, but the fact that people could go into a website-specific, plugins and opt out. And then you've got all of these self-regulation going on with advertisers, the advertising networks, right? The AA, all of these initiatives where you can go and click on an ad and opt out of that specific scope, advertising.
Correct.
So how do you navigate that? How do your customers approach that? Do you feel that that's more of a priorities. So perhaps you see that 75% of the websites do not comply with the GPC signal, but maybe they do comply with a built-in website-specific, platform.
Yeah, well, I mean, Sergio, frankly, we found that 75% don't actually honor any form of opt-out. So
Got it.
that's the key point there, which is, GPC is one method, but, even just the website specific method of stopping tracking, they weren't doing that either. So trackers would just continue to run, which, again, is definitely not by design, right? I think for the listeners listening, please do check your website. We have a Chrome plugin you can download. It's free. It's available in the Chrome store called the Privacy Inspector. So if you want to check out your own website to search, the DataGrail Privacy Inspector, you'll find it in Chrome, in the Chrome store. It's available for free. We maintain that plugin to help support privacy professionals in their, quest to make sure that their website is actually honoring privacy signals as well as opt-outs. But unfortunately, the number is 75% not honoring any form of opt-out, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, I wonder whether we'll be able to really manage. I was thinking, as you said this, and it's very good to know. I'll add a link to this, to your privacy inspector. The European Data Protection Board released their own sort of e-privacy analysis. It is true, it comes from the other angle, as you said, from the opt-in angle, but that you can inspect the DOM or the elements in the source code and find different pixels and third-party calls and so on. But you said it, the whole idea of the consumerization of IT and different departments, marketing, sticking their hands into the code. Everything used to have a process when IT would run the show.
Yeah, that's right.
But we wanted to make things easy. Yeah, and so everyone is adding new pixels all the time. There's a new campaign run by another agency, and marketing is more lightheaded, if I can say.
Yeah.
So they will let other people stick their hands into a tag management platform, and then off you go, a new call to another server, and then another potential lawsuit. So how to mitigate this, assuming that there's always that pending task, right? Someone has to do this. I've been calling this thing an e-privacy stress test in the European sort of space.
Yeah.
But someone is running that audit, and that could be going on forever. You will need to keep running through the scans and verifying. But do you have, after saying this and after working with so many customers, maybe not a silver bullet, but an easier way to approach this so that you can catch as many of these things as possible from the technology point of view?
Yeah. So we do. I think, you summarized it well. The decentralization of IT is what caused a lot of the technology sort of strain and pain that we're experiencing. It does allow teams to be able to move and be agile and deploy quickly. But, when it comes to ensuring, trackers and cookies are stopping, that's now harder than ever. We took a very different approach to this problem, partly because existing solutions really just looked at scanning, right? So scanning what was on the website and then trying to classify based on what's scanned. And that creates its own set of challenges. We took an approach where we built a deep integration with Google Tag Manager. Google Tag Manager is used by 90% of the internet. And so we're able to automatically classify everything that we see within Google Tag Manager, which typically marketers want to connect things to GTM because that ensures that they're getting attribution. And naturally, if they've bought a piece of technology, they want to ensure they're getting attribution for that piece of technology. And so that surfaces the majority of cookies, trackers, scripts that we see. And then we also scan on top of that. And so we provide now the ability to scan and have management of all cookies that are running on a site. We actually released our second version of our consent solution today. So that's super exciting.
Congratulations.
It's frankly our fastest growing product area, simply because the rest of the market, as I described, most of the solutions were built pre-GDPR, right? And when you're thinking about GDPR, it's really default opt-out, which was a big change for marketers to get comfortable with. But when you think about what that means, it's actually much easier, right? You don't drop anything when the individual arrives at the website. Versus when you're trying to support opt-out, you have to decide which particular cookies and trackers are necessary and ensuring that when you provide opt-outs, you're actually pushing those requests to the relevant vendors. and stopping any traction, any sale of or share of that information.
Look, something I asked Max Anderson from Kets as well. Acceptance rates, right? How do you approach this? So that balance and that trade-off, right? Your customers want to have attribution. You're saying it.
That's
They
right.
want to have as much, they want to have a sample that works. They want to have statistical significance. If you ask well, and you do it in a very transparent way, in a very clear way, and people are faced with a choice, a very clean choice between truck and not truck, I do not know people that would just go for truck unless there's a lot of faith put into the company for whatever reason, right?
Yeah.
So then you start getting these 30%. I mean, now I'm thinking of Europe, right? But 30% opt-in rates, 20%, 15%. Some universities got 11%, less than that.
Yeah.
When reject all is at the same level, same color, same pattern as accept all.
Yeah.
But you still need to make this thing work because your customer wants to work. Their analytics have to work. Their attribution has to work. So how do you see that balance? Do you have any dilemmas with that? How do you approach that?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, you have to kind of look at the two regimes that we have, right? So you have the, default opt-out scenario for Europe. Any European visitor that visits a website should have, the ability to consent to any form of tracking. That's where we are. That's the position that Europe has. That's setting aside that for a moment. In the US, really the marketing teams have the ability to start collecting personal information on an individual before they arrive at the website. And that's the environment we're in. What we advise customers to do is, if they are running trackers and scripts on their site, they need to provide a privacy choices link at the bottom of their website, right? They need to provide that to ensure the consumer, the user can update their preferences and opt out if they choose to. But popping a banner similar to what the experience is in Europe is actually not required. And we advise not to actually do that, right? I think that's not the expectation of the regulation. I think when the CCPA was put forward, and we've spoken to the co-authors of the CCPA and keep in touch with them because, I think they led the charge in terms of what's required in the US. And now what many states followed as things proceeded. But I think, in that model, right, the privacy choices link needs to be available. It needs to, as I described earlier, it needs to work. But popping a banner when someone visits a website is frankly not that great of experience. And I think if we can learn one thing from the EU experience, if you spent time in the EU, and I know you obviously have, it's not great, right? A banner when you visit a website, it is fairly intrusive. It restricts your ability to operate the website. And so I think it's a happier medium, and it's a better user experience when opt-outs work and the user has control to be able to update preferences based on what type of trackers they're comfortable having. But that, again, privacy choices link has to be very clearly articulated on the homepage at the bottom and actually work.
I agree. Of course, I've said it here many times. I hate banners.
Me too.
But look, it's happening in the US. It feels like an overkill, but every day I see more and more US websites with the reject all, accept all as if you were in Europe. But some, I don't know, the people are just too scared, or I don't know what, but not even in California. People that are addressing, you're trying to pay a bill in North Carolina and you have these things.
Yeah. No, it's not necessary, to be honest.
Yeah, that's the thing. Okay, so changing tack entirely, right? But also, I'm sure consent will play a role as well. So AI, right? So now you are helping your customers leverage your toolkit and your platform to manage AI governance. And so who is that falling on? Who is taking on the job? Because I know we have these debates always at the IAPP and so on, but from your perspective, who is taking on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very topical question because I think, when AI, things accelerated with LLMs, when that change took charge, obviously it was great for business, right? It provides the ability for us to do very creative things that were never possible before. And that's amazing, right? We can do tasks that were that were literally impossible to do before. Productivity increases obviously across the board. We can build things with significantly less resources, or just build things that were practically impossible prior to Gen AI. But what I think now, where we are, right, we should expect that the majority of software we use, including the one we're on right now, Zoom, right, uses AI in some capability. And so, AI governance is the natural sort of byproduct of that, ensuring that there's governance around the use of AI, particularly because, personal information, SPI, can be used and processed. The challenge is, what we've seen from analysts and frankly the market, it's very unclear who the owner of AI governance should be. I think where we see the market go in the next 5 to 10 years, we will see a function that develops that is, AI governance, right? There'll be teams that will task with just doing that. And I think if you look in the largest of enterprises, that's already started to happen, right? There are teams where you do have, near executive roles for AI governance and managing AI governance. But the market will take some time to kind of adjust here. And so in this intermediary phase, what ends up happening is you have multiple different owners, and the owners vary significantly based on the type of business. So what I mean by that is, a software company has two types of responsibility, right? They have their controller responsibility. So their, classic responsibility as a controller to protect the personal information that they've collected. So for marketing purposes, for customer support, for whatever other needs they have. But then as a software company, you also have the processor responsibility. So the responsibility of all of your customers that use your software. And so as a result, AI governance for that type of business takes on a slightly different form, right? It actually is more formed towards an engineering need, a CISO sort of security need, because you've got customers using your software in any n number of ways. And so if you have AI deployed within your software, you naturally need to have governance around how that works. And we've seen, people do that well. We've also seen companies not do that particularly well. And so I think that, in a large technology business, we typically see the security team take a lot of position in how they manage AI governance. But that said, right, AI itself, particularly around governance, it extends beyond just security. You have biases of AI models. And so that's where you start to have, ethics groups. You start to have privacy needing to be involved there, because personal information is processed under AI. And so, software companies kind of take different forms as they grow and as they become larger in terms of who owns AI governance. For traditional type of companies, so when you're talking, retailers or airlines or, stores that you and I interact with day to day, whether it be in person or online, these businesses are not software businesses. So for the most part, they have controller responsibility of the personal information that they're collecting. They have controller responsibility in terms of how governance of AI needs to be managed. And as a result, it takes on a slightly different form. We usually typically see the CIO or someone in that capacity take on kind of the technology related aspects of the governance of AI, usually in heavy hand with, a general counsel in partnership with privacy. But it's less likely to be, a CISO or a security group that's driving that. It may come out of a CIO. So, we developed an asset in this area because we found that a lot of companies are just struggling to understand who should actually take ownership based on the size of the company and where they are in their journey. And then also, what type of company are they, right? Are they a software company where they have controller and processor responsibility, or are they just a typical traditional business where, most of their responsibility is controller, and therefore they need to ensure guardrails are in place for protecting that personal information and how they use AI governance or how they use AI?
Some people are even criticizing the fact that we try to compartmentalize this thing, because as things mature, right, with AI, it does feel like this is just a technology. We've tried to regulate the one specific technology that could permeate across so many uses, and then we're trying to have someone in charge of this one thing, as if we had someone in charge of spreadsheets 10, 20 years ago, or someone in charge of of
Yeah.
word processors when it's permitting everything. So if you deal with personal data, some people would argue that this has to be the DPO or chief privacy officer. If it deals with protected works, then it's a copyright issue. Then there'll be someone dealing with digital assets and whatever. And so as it is dealt with, as you say now, right? It depends on the type of company, type of department, and so someone in charge of AI as a whole every day sounds more and more overwhelming. Because if you look at the AI Act, it has so many legs. It touches copyright, it touches
That's right.
liability.
Not just privacy, and that's the challenge here. I think that while I have deep admiration for the privacy professionals in the community trying to educate themselves and really leaning into help with AI governance, AI does span more than just privacy, and so that's where you really have to take a wider view of what are we talking about here. There's protection of privacy, and then there's also protection of how are AI models processing, to your point, intellectual property that may have no personal information whatsoever. It could be copyright related, right? Which now that's just a completely different issue, which is why I don't think organizations are fundamentally set up to govern that correctly with one particular person today. I don't think it's likely that we see someone in charge of just AI development across an organization, although we've seen some organizations do that as well. But the governance, I expect, roles generally into security or somewhere close to that field with deep connectivity with legal, because again, it extends far further than just, personal information and the related systems that are in place.
Yeah, because it has a big impact for you. I mean, as a platform, like how the more open you keep it, then the less consistent it could be. I mean, you're trying to build some modules and make someone's job, sort of predefined or have a built-in know-how, right? The way I see platforms when they address a specific role and compliance with data protection, privacy, and so on. Whereas if you keep it extremely flexible, you end up with something that doesn't really have any shape, and then people have to do it all. So I'm wondering about this. I mean, the choices that you need to make. And so what excites you? What's your vision in terms of how the pieces fit together? I know you do all of this. You have all these building blocks for everything, ROP, data mapping. What's exciting for you? What's your vision for how these things are tied together?
Yeah, so great question. I live and breathe this every day, right? So I wake up very excited about what we're doing across many levels. I think privacy is quite early though, right? It's a fairly nascent market, meaning, if we think back to the first technologies that were in place, right? The first technology started just before GDPR, right? GDPR was kind of the watershed moment. That was as a backdrop, from Cambridge Analytica and the global pressure around how personal information is processed. But really, we're talking about a 10-year time horizon total. And so when you take a step back and look at that, if you think about cybersecurity and how long that particular discipline has existed and how it's matured, right? This week we have the RSA conference in San Francisco. You look at how many vendors are at RSA, there's over 300 this year. Right. So cybersecurity and security in general is a massive discipline. Privacy is just getting started. Frankly, this whole market is just getting started. And it's for that reason that, we sort of are deeply focused on data privacy because we feel that this market will expand and significantly expand over the coming years, not just for regulatory pressure, but just further understanding, awareness, expectations of the consumer around how they work with different brands. And if brands aren't honoring their privacy, consumers at this point in 2025 have choice, right? We have choice around the service we're using right now in Zoom, right? We could have easily done this call on a different service. And if, your information was breached or mine was, we might not be using Zoom today, right? That option to have alternatives is very available to people as users of software, but also as consumers of any product or service. And so I think that, when you think about privacy, we think about AI governance as a component of some of the things that we do. So today, shadow IT has existed for, frankly, 10, 15 years. It's only got worse, right? So the use of tools that perhaps the security or legal or privacy team had not approved. Shadow IT won't slow down, right? Because we didn't solve it before AI arrived. now AI has arrived, obviously the governance around shadow IT is even more important than it was before. The average organization between 500 and 2,000 employees uses, drumroll, 1,500 different software across the business. So it's just an enormous amount of systems that are processing personal information. So shadow AI doesn't slow down. We need to provide governance for teams to be able to find that list of applications that are in use. When you think about data subject rights, this gets very interesting, right? Because the use of AI models and the deletion of our data in those AI models is fundamentally a very challenging technical problem. And so I think that's another area that frankly is pretty exciting. And then I think the conversation we were having earlier around consent, it's going to take on different form as we think about how AI is processing our personal information as we arrive at different websites. So opt out of the selling of ads is only one aspect. And I expect that, as websites mature and companies' abilities to drive new products, new services through their website, they will use AI in very unique and novel ways. And we'll need to configure a consent to actually honor those rights in ways that we've not even considered today. So those are areas that I just see at the forefront of conversations that we're having with, some of our largest and most successful customers, where they're really trying to, keep up with the trend, and it's hard. It's not an easy problem, but I think it's a market that's only just starting now.
That's a very interesting one, because shadow IT, on the one hand, many of the things that led to shadow IT look like they're disappearing. So I'm thinking about software as a service and enterprise sales, right? And you know about that. I know you've had your own history in the world of software as a service, right? And so there used to be this wild world of all of us selling to each other, right? Subscription-based, these models, the whole logic of SaaS, the gigantic, even SaaS TR, all these things. Yeah. And so plenty of people have tried to build this model and make it sustainable. But precisely because of data protection compliance and privacy compliance and third-party vendor audits, you start to see that companies are starting to shun and to sort of turn their backs on smaller players. And it's not just because they're small, could disappear. Maybe that was the concern, 10 years ago.
Sure, yeah.
But also because, you need to look at a DPA and all of the safeguards, including security safeguards.
Mm-hmm.
And in my experience, for some small SaaS that 10 years ago would have totally gone through procurement in a breeze, now they're stuck because of privacy compliance. So how do you see that fight? Do you think people will start falling back in the arms of a Microsoft for a lesser product just because it is Microsoft, simply because, again, a smaller software service company cannot go through all these hoops?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think if you look at the growth of AI startups, particularly in the Bay Area, the growth is frankly insane, right? You have, startups coming out of Y Combinator, one of the accelerators, famous accelerator in the Bay Area. And that's not slowing down. And I'd say those companies, while to your point, they may not pass security reviews, they may aspire to, or they may not pass privacy reviews, the upside benefits of marketing teams or customer support teams or e-commerce teams are just too significant for companies to not use those services. And so companies can't get left behind at this stage. And so they will use small startups. In fact, we're seeing the number of small startups in use in organizations, especially at mid-sized companies, is increasing simply because the types of businesses that are offering services that just could have never existed 5 years ago. You've got 10-person companies that would never have sold to a mid-sized enterprise, and certainly not a large enterprise. But large enterprises are taking chances because the upside benefits are just they outweigh, frankly, the compliance or legal or security requirements. Now that's great for business, but it does mean that AI governance, and particularly just like governance around how IT and the software is used, becomes even more important as we go forward.
Fantastic. Daniel, thank you very much.
You bet. Enjoyed it.
Okay, that's all for today. Follow us on Blue Sky and in the Masters of Privacy Altogether profile, you will find the starter pack, which includes the feeds of all of our past guests. There is also a Masters of Privacy LinkedIn channel, which I invite you to follow, where you will find links to our transcripts, cheat sheets, and other surprises every now and then. Our main website is mastersofprivacy.com. Thank you for listening.